The water was a cool, silken embrace against Dr. Elijah Vance's skin. He floated on his back, eyes closed against the brilliant afternoon sun, letting the gentle lapping of the pool wash away the lingering stress of a 12-hour shift in the ER. Here, in the quiet sanctuary of his own backyard, he was just Eli, not Dr. Vance, the man who held life and death in his hands, but a man seeking a few moments of peace. The scent of chlorine and blooming jasmine filled the air, a fragrant cocktail of suburban tranquility. It was a peace he had earned, a peace he had fought for through years of sleepless nights, grueling exams, and the quiet, persistent hum of doubt from those who saw his skin color before they saw his scrubs. This house, this pool, this life, they were the tangible results of his relentless dedication. A sharp, metallic click shattered the calm. Elijah's eyes snapped open. Standing at the edge of his pool were two police officers, their expressions a mixture of suspicion and disdain. One was older, with a weathered face and a thick, graying mustache. The other was younger, his jaw set in a hard line, his hand resting casually on the butt of his holstered pistol. "Can I help you, officers?" Elijah asked, his voice calm, betraying none of the sudden cold dread that had seized him. He slowly, deliberately, began to paddle toward the shallow end. "That's what we're here to find out," the younger officer, whose name tag read Miller, said. His tone was clipped, accusatory. "We got a call about a trespasser." Elijah reached the steps and slowly rose from the water, droplets cascading down his toned physique. He reached for a towel, his movements measured, careful not to make any sudden moves. "A trespasser. I think there's been a mistake. This is my home." The older officer, Donovan, grunted. "That's what they all say. We're going to need to see some ID." Elijah's jaw tightened. He knew this dance. He had danced it more times than he could count. The casual stop and frisks, the routine traffic stops, the security guards who followed him through department stores. But here, in his own backyard, the audacity of it was breathtaking. "My wallet is inside," he said, gesturing toward the house. "If you'll just let me." "Stay right where you are," Miller snapped, his hand tightening on his weapon. "Don't move." A hot surge of anger, sharp and potent, coursed through Elijah. He was a doctor, a healer, a man who had dedicated his life to serving others. And here he was, being treated like a common criminal in his own home. "Look," he said, his voice dropping, taking on the firm, authoritative tone he used in the ER. "I am Dr. Elijah Vance. I own this house. I have lived here for 3 years. Now, I am going to walk into my house, get my identification, and we are going to clear this up." He took a step forward. In a flash, Miller had his gun drawn, pointed directly at Elijah's chest. "I said, don't move," he yelled, his voice cracking with a mixture of fear and adrenaline. The world seemed to slow down. The sun, the jasmine, the quiet suburban streets had all faded away, replaced by the cold, black eye of the gun barrel. Elijah's medical training kicked in. He could see the trajectory of the bullet, the damage it would do, the life it would extinguish. "His life, okay?" he said, raising his hand slowly, his heart pounding against his ribs like a trapped bird. "Okay, I'm not moving." Donovan, who had been silent until now, finally spoke. "Put the gun away, Miller. He's not a threat." "He's not complying," Miller retorted, his eyes wide, his finger twitching on the trigger. "He's a black man in a rich neighborhood." "Miller, that doesn't make him a criminal," Donovan said, his voice laced with a weary resignation. He had seen this before, too many times. The sound of a car door slamming broke the tense standoff. A woman's voice, sharp and panicked, cut through the air. "Ely, oh my God." Ely. It was Sarah, his next-door neighbor, a retired schoolteacher with a penchant for gossip and a prize-winning rose garden. She was clutching her phone, her face pale with shock. "It's okay, Sarah," Elijah said, his voice strained. "It's just a misunderstanding." "A misunderstanding," she cried, her voice trembling. "I saw them from my window. They drew a gun on you." Donovan shot a glare at Miller, who reluctantly holstered his weapon. "Ma'am, we're just doing our job." "We had a call," Sarah interrupted, her voice rising in indignation. "From who?" "Who would call the police on Dr. Vance? He's the kindest, most decent man on this street. He saved my husband's life, for God's sake." Her words hung in the air, a stark contrast to the ugly scene that had just unfolded. Miller had the grace to look ashamed, his gaze dropping to the pristine patio stones. Donovan, however, seemed unfazed. "We still need to see some ID, sir," he said, his tone still firm, but with a hint of something else. Respect? Or was it just a grudging acknowledgement of the changing dynamics of the situation? Elijah nodded, his anger slowly receding, replaced by a cold, simmering rage. He walked into his house, the officers trailing behind him like a pair of unwelcome shadows. He retrieved his wallet from the kitchen counter, his hands shaking slightly. He was a doctor. He had faced down death, disease, and despair, but nothing had ever made him feel as vulnerable, as powerless, as this. He handed his driver's license to Donovan, who examined it with a practiced eye. "Elijah Vance," he read aloud. "Address matches." He handed it back, his expression unreadable. Sorry for the disturbance, Dr. Vance. The apology was flat, perfunctory, an empty gesture. A disturbance, Elijah said, his voice dangerously quiet. You pulled a gun on me, in my own home, in front of my neighbor. That's more than a disturbance, officer, that's a threat. Miller, who had been silent, finally found his voice. I was following procedure. You were non-compliant. Elijah's voice rose, laced with a bitter irony. I was a black man in a place you didn't think I belonged. That was my only crime. He looked from Miller's flushed face to Donovan's impassive one. He saw no remorse, no understanding, just the cold, hard certainty of their own righteousness. And in that moment, something inside him snapped. The quiet, respectable Dr. Vance, the man who always turned the other cheek, the man who believed in the fundamental goodness of people, was gone in his place was a man who had been pushed too far. A man who was about to show these two officers, and the world, who he really was. He picked up his phone and dialed a number from memory. A number he had hoped he would never have to use. Hello, a voice answered on the other end. This is Marcus. Marcus, Elijah said, his voice steady, his eyes locked on the two officers. It's Eli. I need you to do something. For me? He listened for a moment, then a slow, cold smile spread across his face. Oh, I'm sure, he said. I'm very, very sure. He hung up the phone and looked at the two officers, who were watching him with a mixture of confusion and apprehension. You wanted to know who I am? He said, his voice soft, but with an undercurrent of steel. Well, you're about to find out. He turned and walked back out to the pool, leaving the two officers standing in his kitchen, the scent of chlorine and jasmine now tinged with the metallic Thames of fear. He dove into the cool, clear water, the silken embrace now feeling less like a sanctuary and more like the calm before the storm. He had always believed in the power of healing, but now, he was about to discover the power of a different kind, of justice, the kind that didn't come from a courtroom or a badge, but from the depths of a man who had been wronged. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the perfectly manicured lawn. The distant sound of a siren could be heard, growing closer, but this time, it wasn't coming for him, it was coming for them. And as the first of the black sedans pulled up to the curb, their tinted windows hiding the faces of the men inside, Elijah Vance knew one thing for certain: his life, and the lives of the two officers who had trespassed into his world, would never be the same. The game had changed, and he was the one making the rules now. The doctor was out, and someone else, someone far more dangerous, was in. The first lesson was about to begin, and it would be a lesson in power, in fear, and in the terrible, swift justice of a man who had nothing left to lose. The quiet, suburban street was about to become a war zone, and Dr. Elijah Vance was about to become its king, the king of a kingdom built on the ashes of his own shattered peace, a kingdom where the only law was his own, and the only sentence was his to command. The trespassers had been warned. Now, they would pay the price, and the price would be everything. Everything they had. Everything they were. Everything they ever hoped to be. The doctor was in, and he was ready to operate. The wail of the sirens Donovan and Miller had heard approaching died abruptly, replaced by an unnerving silence. The flashing red and blue lights they expected never materialized. Instead, the three black sedans slid to the curb with the silent, predatory grace of sharks. They were matte black, with windows so heavily tinted they seemed to swallow the fading sunlight. For a moment, nothing happened. The two officers, still standing awkwardly in Elijah's kitchen, exchanged a nervous glance. This wasn't a standard patrol car response. This was something else entirely. The doors of all three cars opened in perfect, unnerving synchrony. 6 men emerged, 2 from each vehicle. They were all dressed in identical, impeccably tailored dark suits, their movements fluid and economical. They fanned out, creating a secure perimeter around the property with a discipline that was clearly not civilian. One spoke quietly into his wrist, his eyes, hidden behind dark sunglasses, sweeping across the yard. Then, from the lead sedan, a 7th man appeared. He was tall, lean, with a face carved from granite and a composure so absolute it felt like a physical force. He walked past his men, through the open patio doors, and into the kitchen. He ignored the 2 uniformed officers completely, his entire focus landing on Elijah, who was now climbing out of the pool, water sluicing from his body. The man's gaze was one of deep, unwavering loyalty. "Eli," he said. His voice was a low baritone, calm and resonant. "You're wet." "Marcus," Elijah replied, a ghost of a smile touching his lips. It didn't reach his eyes. His eyes were glacial. Things escalated. Marcus's gaze finally flickered to Donovan and Miller. It was a brief, dismissive assessment, the way a butcher might glance at a side of beef. "I can see that. Protocol." The word hung in the air, charged with unspoken meaning. Miller, whose bravado had completely evaporated, stammered, "Protocol? What protocol? We're officers of the law." "We," Marcus's head snapped toward him. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. "You will speak only when you are spoken to." The command was so absolute, so backed by an unshakable certainty of power, that Miller's mouth clicked shut. He looked like a child who had been scolded by a fearsome giant. Donovan, older and more seasoned, tried a different tack. He rested a hand on his service weapon, a reflexive, territorial gesture. "I don't know who you people are, but this is an active police situation. You're interfering." Before he could finish the sentence, two of the suited men were inside, flanking him and Miller. They moved with a speed that was shocking. One of them, with a fluid, practiced motion, plucked the pistol from Donovan's holster. He did it so smoothly that Donovan barely had time to register the loss. The man disassembled the weapon in 3 clicks, placing the slide barrel and magazine neatly on Elijah's granite countertop. He performed the same action on Miller's holstered weapon before the younger officer could even flinch. The message was clear. "Your weapons are toys, and we are not playing. My apologies." "Marcus," Elijah said, wrapping a towel around his waist. He walked over to the counter and picked up the pieces of Donovan's gun, examining them with a detached curiosity. "My friends here were concerned I was a trespasser. They were insistent." He looked up, his cold eyes locking with Donovan's. Officer Miller was so insistent, he felt it necessary to aim his weapon at my chest. A flicker of something displeasure, perhaps, crossed Marcus's face. "Is that so?" He turned his full attention to Miller, who visibly shrank. "Your name is Miller." Miller swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. "Why, yes, sir. And you threatened Dr. Vance." I was following procedure," Miller mumbled. His gaze fixed on the floor. He was non-compliant. "He was non-compliant," Elijah echoed, his voice dripping with venomous sarcasm. He stepped closer, invading Miller's personal space. The scent of chlorine and righteous fury filled the air between them. "I was floating in my own pool, in my own backyard, in the home I paid for with 17 years of my life dedicated to saving people. People like you. People like your families. And you put a gun on me because you couldn't fathom that a man who looks like me could possibly own a house like this." Elijah turned back to Marcus. "The call, Marcus. Make the call." Marcus nodded, pulling out a sleek, satellite phone. He pressed a single button. The call connected instantly. "This is Sentinel. We have a code black situation. Location, 114 Willow Creek Lane, Northwood. I need a full information lockdown and a media blackout. Effective immediately. Authorization, Vance, Elijah MD. Alpha Levio clearance." Donovan's blood ran cold. Alpha Levio clearance. Sentinel? These weren't terms used by any civilian or law enforcement agency. He knew this was the language of intelligence communities, of deep state operations. His mind raced, trying to make sense of the situation. Who was this doctor? His own police radio crackled to life on his belt. "Donovan, what's your status?" "We're getting a high-priority dispatch override from a federal source telling all local units to stand down and vacate a 2-mile radius of your location. What the hell is going on over there?" Donovan couldn't answer. One of Marcus's men simply reached over and switched the radio off. They drew their weapons. "Eli," Marcus stated, his voice flat. It wasn't a question. It was a confirmation of a fact that had sealed the officer's fate. That changes things. It's no longer about a simple reprimand. It's about a demonstrated threat. "I'm aware," Elijah said. He walked over to his wet bar and poured himself a glass of water, his hand perfectly steady. He took a slow sip, his eyes never leaving the two officers. They looked like trapped animals, their world shrinking by the second. What are you going to do to us?" Miller whimpered, his fear finally breaking through in a pathetic plea. Elijah set the glass down with a quiet click. "Do to you? Nothing. I'm a doctor. I heal people." He paused, letting the words hang in the air. "But I used to be something else. A long time ago, I worked in a very different kind of emergency room. The kind where we didn't always save the patient. Sometimes, our job was to make sure the disease was completely, utterly, and permanently He looked at Marcus. "They are a disease, Marcus, a sickness of prejudice and abuse of power that you and I have seen fester in the dark for far too long, and I find myself in a uniquely clinical mood." "Understood," Marcus replied. He gestured to his men. "Take them, sanitize the scene. No record of our presence here, no record of their departure. They're going on an extended, unscheduled leave of absence." Donovan finally found his voice, a desperate roar of defiance. "You can't do this. We're police officers. We have rights. There are rules." Elijah laughed. It was a cold, bitter sound that held no humor. You're absolutely right, Officer Donovan. There are rules. The problem is, you just found out that you and I don't play by the same set. He walked right up to Donovan, his face inches away. You came into my home, my sanctuary, and you brought the ugliness of the outside world with you. You threatened my life because you couldn't see past your own bigotry. You forfeited your rights the moment you saw me as a target instead of a citizen. He straightened up, his demeanor shifting back to that of a detached clinician. We'll be taken to a secure facility. A very quiet, very remote place. There, you will be debriefed. You will spend every waking moment contemplating the consequences of your actions. You will learn, in excruciating detail, about the lives you have ruined with your casual cruelty. And maybe, just maybe, when we are done with you, you will be fit to return to society. But I wouldn't count on it. Marcus's men moved in, their hands grabbing the officer's arms in grips of iron. Miller started to struggle, a wild, panicked look in his eyes. Donovan stood rigid, a mask of horrified disbelief etched on his face. This wasn't happening. It couldn't be. My family. Donovan choked out. My pension. Should have thought of them before you decided to play judge, jury, and executioner at my poolside, Elijah said, turning his back on them as they were forcibly escorted out of his house and into the waiting sedans. He heard the car doors shut with a heavy, final thud. The sun had now completely set, plunging the yard into twilight. The only lights were the soft, ambient glows from the pool and the house. The sedans pulled away from the curb as silently as they had arrived, disappearing into the night. Marcus stood by the doorway, the memory wipe on the neighbor. No, Elijah said, his voice weary. Let Sarah remember. Let someone know what they tried to do. He stared out at the dark, placid water of his pool. The peace he had felt just an hour ago was a distant memory, a ghost of a life he could no longer have. He had one. He had brought a terrifying, overwhelming force down on two men who had wronged him. He had shown them who he really was, but as he stood there, the architect of their destruction, a cold, hollow feeling began to spread through his chest. He had unleashed the monster he had worked so hard to cage. He had used a power designed to protect nations to settle a personal score. He had excised the disease, just as he'd said, but the procedure had left him with a wound of its own, a deep, septic emptiness where his soul used to be. The silence that followed was heavier and more suffocating than the confrontation itself. He had his justice. Now, he had to live with it. Elijah felt a strange sense of vertigo, as if the solid ground of his meticulously constructed life had just turned to quicksand. He looked at the woman on his doorstep. Karen Donovan saw not an accuser, but a ghost from a life he swore he'd left behind, a loose thread, a variable that hadn't been accounted for. His training, the cold clinical instinct of the Sentinel diagnostician, screamed at him to shut the door, deny everything, and erase the threat. But the face of the surgeon's daughter, her eyes wide and empty, flashed in his mind. He couldn't. Not again, please. Come in, he said, his voice smoother and calmer than he felt. It was his doctor's voice, the one that projected quiet authority and empathy, the one he used to comfort the dying and reassure the terrified. Karen hesitated for a second, her own instincts warring with her desperation. She was walking into the home of the man at the center of her husband's disappearance, but the quiet invitation seemed less threatening than a slammed door. She stepped inside, her eyes immediately casing the pristine, minimalist interior. It was beautiful, expensive, and utterly sterile. Can I get you some water? Elijah offered, gesturing towards the kitchen where, just 2 days earlier, his life had irrevocably fractured. Double quotes. No, thank you, she said, her hands clutching her purse strap like a lifeline. I won't take up much of your time. I just need to understand what happened here. Elijah led her to the living room, a space with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the now serene pool. He motioned for her to sit, but she remained standing, a small, defiant figure in the vast, impersonal room. He leaned against the back of a sofa, creating a careful distance between them. Mrs. Donovan, he began, his tone gentle. I can only imagine how worried you must be. And yes, your husband and his partner were here 2 days ago. Why? She cut in, her voice sharp. The department won't give me a straight answer. They fed me a ridiculous story about a secret federal mission. He had to anchor his lie as close to the official narrative as possible. They were responding to an automated security alarm for my property. It was a false alarm system. Malfunction? We were sorting it out when they received a priority call on their radio. They seemed in a great hurry. They apologized for the intrusion and left. He let the lie settle, simple and plausible. Karen's eyes narrowed. She wasn't buying it. A false alarm. That's it. And they just happened to get called away to a top-secret assignment from your living room. I can't speak to their assignment, Elijah said, maintaining his placid demeanor. I only know what I saw. It all seemed quite sudden. It's funny, Karen said, taking a deliberate step closer. Her fear was being burned away by a rising righteous anger, because that's not what your neighbor told me. Elijah's composure didn't slip, but deep inside, a cold dread began to uncoil. Sarah, the retired teacher, the one variable he had intentionally left on the board, a miscalculation. I spoke with Sarah Jenkins next door, Karen continued, her voice gaining strength as she saw a flicker of something behind his calm mask. She was quite distressed. She told me she saw your false alarm. She saw Officer Miller with his gun drawn and pointed at you. The air in the room grew thick and heavy. The carefully constructed reality Elijah had presented to her shattered. He was no longer a helpful citizen caught in a strange bureaucratic mix-up. He was a man who had been held at gunpoint by the very officers who were now missing. She must have been mistaken, Elijah said, but the words were hollow. They both knew he was lying now. Was she? Karen challenged, her voice rising. Was she also mistaken about the black cars that showed up minutes later, the ones with no markings? The men in suits who took my husband away because she saw that too? She was terrified. She didn't want to talk to me, but she's a good woman, and she knew something evil had happened here. Elijah felt cornered. The prey, the trespasser he had been made to feel like in his own yard, was now the predator in the eyes of this woman. He had become the very thing he'd sought to punish. Mrs. Donovan, he said, his voice losing its gentle, therapeutic edge, and taking on a harder, more serious tone. You need to understand, her husband and his partner crossed a line. They came into my home and threatened my life. The situation was resolved. Resolved. She repeated. The word a venomous hiss. What does that mean? Where is he? What did you do to him? I'm a doctor. I didn't do anything, he said, the statement a desperate half-truth. But there are consequences for actions. Your husband's department isn't lying to you, not entirely. He is on assignment. He is safe, but he is unavailable. And for your own safety you need to accept that answer and stop this. It was a direct warning, cold and clear. He was trying to frighten her, to make her retreat for her own good. But he had underestimated the fierce love that fueled her search. My safety, she laughed, a bitter, broken sound. You think I care about my safety when my husband has been disappeared by shadow men because he answered a call at your house? I am not the one who should be afraid, Dr. Vance, you are, because I will not stop. I will go to the press. I will go to the FBI. I will scream from the rooftops what happened here, until someone, somewhere, is forced to listen. He saw it then, the absolute, unbreakable will of a person with nothing left to lose. She was not a variable to be managed. She was an inevitability. His clean surgical excision was about to turn into a messy, public amputation. He stood up straight, his entire demeanor shifting. The doctor vanished, and for a fleeting moment, Karen Donovan saw the man from Sentinel. His eyes were like chips of ice, his posture radiating a quiet, lethal authority. That would be a grave mistake, he said, his voice low and dangerous. He walked her to the door. Thank you for coming, Mrs. Donovan. I have told you all. I am going to. Do not come back. He closed the door on her shocked face, his heart hammering against his ribs. He leaned his forehead against the cool wood, his knuckles white as he gripped the doorknob. He had failed. He had failed to de-escalate, failed to control the narrative, and failed to protect her from the truth. She wouldn't stop. She would be a beacon, drawing the wrong kind of attention until the entire fragile structure of his life, and the secrets of Sentinel, came crashing down. He pulled out his satellite phone and called Marcus. She was here, Elijah said, his voice strained. Donovan's wife, she knows. The neighbor talked. Marcus was silent for a moment. When he spoke, his voice was chillingly pragmatic. The witness, Sarah Jenkins, can be handled. A memory wipe is clean. But the wife is a different problem. She's the emotional core. She won't be silenced by threats or reason. We have a breach, Eli. What do you propose? Elijah asked, already knowing the answer. The objective of Sentinel is to protect the integrity of the system and its assets. You are the asset, she is the threat, Marcus stated, as if reading from a manual. Her continued investigation puts the entire program at risk. It puts you at risk. There is only one protocol for a threat that cannot be contained or deterred. A cold void opened in Elijah's stomach. No, it's the only way to guarantee silence, Eli, to truly excise the problem. It's clean, it's permanent. You know the procedure. A tragic accident. A robbery gone wrong. No loose ends. Marcus paused, his voice softening ever so slightly. I can't authorize it. Only you can. You're the alpha on this. Tell me what to do, Eli. Give the order. Elijah stood in his silent, perfect house, the phone pressed to his ear. Outside, a determined woman was getting into her car, a woman whose only crime was loving her husband, and he, the healer, the man who had taken an oath to do no harm, was being asked to order her death to protect himself. The line he had crossed 2 days ago was no longer behind him. It was here, now, and he was being commanded to cross it again, into an abyss from which he would never return. The words hung in the air, cold and sharp as a shard of glass. Give the order. It was the voice of the old world, the one he had fled. The clean, simple, monstrous logic of Sentinel. A problem arises. Erase the problem. He could feel the pathways of his old self lighting up, showing him how easy it would be. One word, a quiet command, and the ghost at his door would be exorcised forever. His sanctuary would be secure. The monster would go back in its cage. No, Elijah said. The word was quiet, but it was absolute. It was the sound of a door slamming shut. Eli, listen to me. Marcus's voice was urgent, losing its professional detachment. You're thinking like a civilian. She's a threat vector. Her investigation is a contagion. You know the protocol? It exists for a reason. The protocol is for assets and enemies. Marcus, not for a grieving woman who just wants to find her husband, Elijah retorted, pacing his living room like a caged animal. The man I am now, the man I've spent 10 years becoming, doesn't give that order. The man you are now exists because of the man you were then. Marcus shot back, his voice rising. That house, that pool, this entire peaceful life, is a fiction paid for by Sentinel. It's a gilded cage, Eli, and you just invited a fox inside. If you don't give the order, you're choosing her over the entire organization, over me. The council will not see it as mercy. They will see it as a compromise. They will vote to contain the breach themselves. Elijah knew what contain the breach meant. It meant a clean sweep. It meant Karen Donovan would die anyway, and he, the compromised asset, would likely be retired along with her. He had not prevented her death. He had only delayed it and, in the process, put his own life on the clock. He had lost control. Don't do anything, Elijah commanded, a last-ditch effort to assert his authority. I will handle it. Stay put. That's a direct order. Marcus. He ended the call before Marcus could reply. He stood in the silent room, his mind racing. He was a diagnostician facing an impossible case. The patient his life was suffering from two aggressive competing diseases. Karen's relentless investigation and Sentinel's lethal protocols. Treating one would empower the other. He couldn't destroy Karen. He couldn't reason with Sentinel. So, he had to change the diagnosis. He had to perform a different kind of surgery. Not an excision, but a transplant. He had to transplant a new, terrifying truth into Karen Donovan's reality. A truth that would stop her cold. He grabbed his car keys. He knew from a quick search that Karen lived in a modest suburb 30 miles away. Driving there was a colossal, insane risk. It was a breach of every rule he had ever lived by, but the rules no longer applied. He was off the board, operating on his own. He found her house Isili. It was a small, neat colonial with a basketball hoop in the driveway and bicycles lying in the grass. It was a home, a real one, filled with the messy, beautiful chaos of a family. It was everything his own sterile mansion was not. He parked down the street, waiting in the dark. He saw her through the window, talking on the phone, her face a mask of anguish. He saw 2 children's bedrooms, their lights soft. The sight of it was a physical blow. Hardening his resolve, he waited until the children's lights were out and she was alone in the living room, staring blankly at the TV. He got out of his car, walked up the path, and knocked on her door. She opened it, and her face went from exhaustion to pure shock, then to fear. She tried to slam it shut, but he was already speaking, his voice low and urgent. Mrs. Donovan, please, don't scream. I'm not here to hurt you. I'm here to save your life. His tone, the sheer insanity of him showing up at her home, held her frozen in the doorway. You have to listen to me, he said, staying on her porch, making no move to enter. The people who took your husband, they're not the government. They're not the police. They're my past. A past I ran from. What are you talking about? She whispered, clutching the door. Before I was a doctor, I worked for some very dangerous people. A private organization that cleans up problems for powerful clients. They operate outside the law, and they are absolutely ruthless. Your husband, and his partner, by threatening me, stumbled into that world. They registered on the radar of people you cannot imagine. He let the lie, woven with threads of truth, sink in. He was no longer the villain. He was a fellow victim, a man haunted by the same monsters. When they took him, he continued, his voice dropping. They were going to kill him. Both of them. A simple, clean disappearance. I intervened. I used what little capital I had left with them to argue for their lives. I convinced them that letting them live, but keeping them, was a better solution. I don't believe you, she said, but her voice wavered. A sliver of hope that her husband was alive was warring with the terror of his story. You have too, he pleaded, his gaze intense. They are watching me. They are watching you. The only reason you're alive right now is because I am trying to control this. When you told me you were going to the press, you signed your own death warrant. These people don't tolerate loose ends. They will erase you, your children, and make it look like a tragic accident. Tears welled in her eyes as the horror of his words washed over her. Why? Why are you telling me this? Because I am not one of them anymore, he said, delivering the final, crucial piece of his fabricated truth. And I will not have your death on my conscience. He took a gamble, a chilling, intimate detail to prove his access. Your husband has a tattoo on his left forearm. A crude, faded eagle with a banner underneath. It says Semper Fi. He got it in Fallujah. He's proud of it, but he's ashamed of the small scar just above it, where he tried to burn off a girl's name with a lit cigarette when he was a dumb, heartbroken recruit. Karen gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. That was a secret only she knew. A story Frank had told her in confidence years ago, a moment of vulnerability she cherished. The knowledge of it was undeniable proof. This man, this doctor, had access to her husband. His story was real. They are alive, Mrs. Donovan, Elijah said, softly, but they are gone. You will never see them again. The only way you and your children survive is if you mourn him as a hero, lost on a secret mission. You must stop digging. You must stop talking. You must let him go. If you do, they will leave you alone. If you don't, they will send a team to clean up the mess. And believe me, they are very, very good at cleaning. He saw the fight go out of her. The fierce determination was replaced by a bottomless, crushing despair. He had saved her life, but he had killed her hope. It was the cruelest cut of all. He turned and walked away, leaving her weeping silently in her doorway. As he got to his car, his satellite phone buzzed. It was Marcus. The council has been monitoring your vehicle's GPS. Marcus's voice was ice. They know you went to her house. They know you spoke to her. They've reviewed your file, Eli, your actions. In the field, the incident with the arms dealer's daughter. Your psychological profile is flagged as compromised by sentiment. Elijah felt his blood run cold. You broke protocol, Marcus continued, and there was a note of genuine regret in his voice. You went rogue. You're no longer the alpha on this operation. Eli, you're now part of the liability. The vote was unanimous. You are to be exited suddenly. The world sharpened into terrifying focus. The sound of a car engine starting down the street wasn't just a neighbor leaving for work. The flicker of movement in his rearview mirror wasn't a reflection. They're already here, aren't they? Elijah asked, his voice calm, the old instincts taking over completely. Goodbye, Eli, Marcus said, and the line went dead. Black sedan, identical to the ones that had come to his house, pulled out from a side street, blocking his path. Another one materialized behind him, boxing him in. The hunters had become the hunted. Dr. Vance, the healer, was gone. The only one left was the diagnostician, and he was running out of time. The world snapped into a state of hyper-reality, every detail sharp and menacing. The soft glow of the suburban streetlights, the rustle of leaves in the manicured trees, the distant hum of the highway, it all became the soundtrack to an execution. Elijah's, his training, dormant for a decade, roared to life. It was a cold, pragmatic fire in his veins, burning away the last vestiges of Dr. Vance. He didn't panic. He diagnosed SSS. One mid-sized sedan, 2 occupants, hostile liabilities, 1 black sedan, behind, 2 occupants, 1 black sedan, ahead, 2 occupants, box and maneuver, standard Sentinel capture protocol, objective, create chaos, break the perimeter. His foot slammed onto the accelerator. The powerful engine of his luxury car screamed as he shot forward, not at the sedan blocking him, but at the curb. The car launched onto the manicured lawn of a darkened house, tearing through a hedge and spraying dirt. Alarms blinked. Lights flashed on inside. Chaos. He wrenched the wheel, sliding through a backyard, his headlights illuminating a child's swing set that flashed by like a ghost of the life he was leaving behind. He burst through a wooden fence and back onto a parallel street, tires squealing on the asphalt. In his rearview mirror, he saw the sedans moving to intercept. Their movements coordinated, impossibly fast. They were hurting him. His satellite phone, still clutched in his hand, buzzed again. He answered, putting it on speaker. It was Marcus. Don't fight it, Eli. Marcus's voice pleaded, strained over the roar of the engine. A capture team is gentler than a cleanup crew. I can promise you a quiet retirement. There's no such thing, Marcus. Elijah yelled back, swerving to avoid a startled deer. There's only the cage or the grave. You know the protocol. He was driving toward the old industrial park on the edge of town, a place of abandoned warehouses and rusting train tracks, a place of complex angles and shadows. A surgeon's operating theater. He saw the roadblock ahead. The other two sedans had circled around, their headlights forming a brilliant, impassable wall. Trapped. He looked at his dashboard. An idea sparked a desperate, insane gamble. He reached into the glove compartment, his fingers searching past insurance papers until they found it. A medical emergency kit. He pulled out a large-bore syringe and a vial of epinephrine. I'm sorry, Eli, Marcus said, his voice full of a terrible finality. Elijah jammed the accelerator to the floor, aiming his car directly between the two sedans. The Sentinel agents braced for impact. But just before he reached them, Elijah unbuckled his seatbelt, popped the epinephrine into the syringe, and jammed it deep into his own thigh. The world exploded in a jolt of pure chemical fire. His heart hammered against his ribs like a machine gun. His senses screamed. Time seemed to warp, slowing to a crawl. He yanked the steering wheel hard to the left, sending the car into a violent, screeching spin. He threw open his door and launched himself from the driver's seat just as his car, still spinning, slammed into the front end of one of the sedans. The crash was a symphony of destruction. Metal shrieked, glass shattered. He hit the pavement, hard, rolling, the impact jarring his bones. But the adrenaline surge numbed the pain. He was on his feet in a second, sprinting into the darkness of the industrial park as the Sentinel team, disoriented by the crash, scrambled from their vehicles. He dove behind a rusted dumpster, his breath coming in ragged gasps, his heart trying to beat its way out of his chest. He heard them coming, their footsteps quiet, professional. They were fanning out, sweeping the area with infrared goggles. He was exposed. A figure appeared at the edge of the alley, tall, composed, holding a firearm with practiced ease. It was Marcus. It's over, Eli, Marcus said, his voice soft in the sudden quiet. He raised his weapon. Is it? Elijah asked, not moving from his position. Is this what we are now, Marcus? Gardeners who pull up weeds? What happened? To the surgeons who save the body politic, the mission is to protect the system, Marcus stated, his voice flat, but his eyes told a different story. They were filled with conflict. You are a threat to it. I'm not a threat. I'm a reminder, Elijah said, his voice steady despite the epinephrine storm raging in his blood. A reminder that we used to have a moral compass, that we had lines we wouldn't cross. You ordered the death of an innocent woman to protect a protocol. When the protocol becomes more important than the people it's meant to protect, the system is already diseased. And you're not the cure anymore, you're the cancer. Marcus's face contorted. Every word was a scalpel, cutting through years of indoctrination. She had children, Marcus, Elijah pressed, his voice dropping to a whisper. We were never supposed to touch the children. The memory of the arms dealer's daughter flashed between them, an unspoken ghost. Marcus's hand, the one holding the gun, trembled almost imperceptibly. He looked at the man before him, his friend, his mentor, the man who had pulled him from a gutter and given him a purpose. And he looked at the cold, clinical darkness that purpose had become. He lowered the gun. He touched his earpiece. Sentinel team, this is Sentinel Prime. The target has been neutralized. I repeat, the asset is terminated. He went down in the canal. Body is unrecoverable. I'm calling a full withdrawal. Mission accomplished. He looked at Elijah, his expression grim. I just erased my career and signed my own death warrant. But he was right. The man I work for wouldn't have done this. He paused. Dr. Vance died tonight. His car went into the canal during the pursuit. Don't ever let me see you again. Marcus turned and walked away, melting back into the darkness without another word. 1 year later, Karen Donovan tucks her children into bed. She tells them their father was a hero, a story she now repeats with a numb, practiced ease. She knows he's not dead, but he is gone. She lives in a state of quiet terror, a prisoner of the horrifying truth she can never speak, forever looking over her shoulder for the men in black cars. Her hope is dead, but her children are alive. She doesn't know if it was a fair trade. In a sterile white room, in a facility that doesn't exist, Frank Donovan and a man who was once named Miller repeat phrases from a workbook. Their eyes are placid, their memories scrubbed and rewritten. They are being retrained for new, simpler lives. They have no memory of a pool, a gun, or a doctor named Elijah Vance. The excision was in its own way, complete. Thousands of miles away, in a dusty, impoverished village in a forgotten corner of the world, a man with haunted eyes and skillful hands finishes stitching a wound on a young boy's arm. The clinic is little more than a hut. The equipment is archaic, and he is paid in chickens and gratitude. He has no name here. He is just the doctor. He has lost his house, his fortune, his past, and his name. He has nothing left as he watches the boy run out of the clinic and into the brilliant, unforgiving sun. A genuine smile touches his lips for the first time in a year. He looks down at his hands, the hands that healed, the hands that commanded, the hands that destroyed, and the hands that now, finally, heal again. He is no longer Dr. Vance, the king of his gilded cage. He is no longer the monster from Sentinel. He has finally shown the world who he really was, and in doing so, had to become someone entirely new to find his peace. And here, in the middle of nowhere, with nothing to his name, he was, at last, free. The silence in Elijah's house was a living entity. It was heavier than grief, deeper than the sterile quiet of an operating theater. After a failed resuscitation, he stood under the scalding spray of his shower, trying to wash away the events of the last few hours. But the filth was internal. The cold satisfaction he'd felt watching the sedans drive away had evaporated, leaving a bitter chemical residue on his soul. He was a physician. His hands, which had set bones, stitched wounds, and restarted hearts, had just signed a warrant for the complete dismantlement of two men's lives. He shut off the water and stared at his reflection in the steam-fogged mirror. The face looking back was the same, but the eyes were different. They held the familiar, weary weight of a man who had seen too much death. But now there was something else there, tooth-cold, flat authority of a man who could command it. He had spent a decade building this life, this persona of Dr. Vance, the benevolent healer, as a shield against the man he used to be. In one afternoon, two ignorant cops had not only broken into his sanctuary, they had shattered the shield, forcing the monster out of its cage. His past wasn't a secret so much as a classified history. Sentinel was the unofficial, whispered, name for a clandestine unit buried so deep within the U.S. intelligence apparatus it technically didn't exist. They weren't assassins or spies in the traditional sense. They were fixers, surgeons for the body politic. When a corrupt senator, a rogue general, or a compromised foreign asset threatened national security, Sentinel was the instrument of removal. They didn't kill, they would descend, isolate the target, and perform a societal nephrectomy, surgically removing the person from their life with such precision that the system barely registered their absence. New identities, fabricated histories, transfers to black sites disguised as corporate relocations. It was clean, efficient, and utterly terrifying. Elijah had been their best diagnostician. His brilliance wasn't just in medicine. It was in understanding systems biological, social, political, and identifying the exact point of incision. He'd quit when a routine excision of a compromised arms dealer had collateral damage. The man's young daughter witnessed it all. Her blank, traumatized stare was the one wound he could never heal. He walked away, built a new life, and promised himself he would only ever use his skills to save, never to cut away again. Until today. Today, he'd used a scalpel designed for a cancerous tumor to remove a splinter. His phone buzzed on the bathroom counter. It was Marcus. "It's done," Marcus said, his voice devoid of emotion. "The subjects are at Facility 9. The official narrative is in place. Sudden mandatory transfer to a federal task force training program in Alaska, non-contact, 6-month minimum. Their captain has been briefed by a liaison from the Department of Justice. As far as Northwood PD is concerned, Miller and Donovan are patriots on special assignment. And their families?" Elijah asked, the words tasting like ash. "Pensions secure, benefits uninterrupted. They will receive official letters of commendation and a plausible cover story. It's a clean excision, Eli, by the book." "This wasn't in the book, Marcus," Elijah retorted, his voice tight. "This was a personal grievance. I broke protocol." There was a pause on the other end. "They drew on you, Eli. They threatened an alpha-level asset. At that point, personal or not, it became a matter of security. The system protected itself. You are the system." Elijah didn't feel like the system. He felt like a hypocrite. "Thank you, Marcus." He ended the call, the silence rushing back in, more accusing than before. 40 miles away, Karen Donovan checked the clock for the 10th time. 2 a.m. Frank was never this late without calling. Never. He was a creature of habit. End of shift, a quick beer with his partner at a cop bar, and home by midnight, smelling of stale beer and complaining about paperwork. She'd called his cell a dozen times. It went straight to a dead, silent voicemail, not even the usual recording. She'd called Miller's wife, a nervous young woman named Becky, who was also frantic. Her husband, rookie eager, and always on his phone, was also unreachable. Finally, she called the front desk at the precinct. The night sergeant, a gruff old-timer named Henderson who'd known Frank for 20 years, sounded strangely distant. "Oh, hey Karen. Yeah, sorry about that. Shoulda had the captain call you. Frank and the kid, Miller, got tapped for a special assignment. Big deal stuff. Special assignment." "What are you talking about, Henderson?" "He was on a routine patrol in Northwood." "Yeah, well, things change fast. Got a call from the feds. They needed 2 guys with clean records for an undercover op. It's all very hush-hush. They were on a plane before their shifts even ended. The story was so full of holes, it was practically transparent. The federal government didn't just pluck 2 small-town cops off the street for a top-secret mission. That was movie nonsense. Where did they go? When can I talk to him?" Karen demanded, her fear curdling into suspicion. Can't say, Karen. National security, Henderson said, his voice flat and rehearsed. It's a non-contact assignment for a while. You'll get an official letter in a day or two. Look, I gotta go. He hung up before she could ask another question. She stood in the kitchen, her heart pounding. Frank was a pain. He was stubborn, prejudiced, and thought the world was simpler than it was. But he was her husband. He was a good father to their 2 kids, sleeping peacefully upstairs, and he was missing. The official story was a lie, a clumsy, insulting lie. And if the police department was lying to her, then her husband wasn't on a mission. He was in trouble. Over the next 2 days, the lie became an impenetrable wall. The official letter arrived, a cold piece of paper from the Department of Justice, full of patriotic jargon and sealed with a warning against discussing the matter. Frank's patrol car was back at the impound lot, its GPS scrubbed clean. When she demanded to see the logs, the police chief himself, a man who had been to her house for barbecues, told her they were now classified. Every instinct she had screamed that something was terribly wrong. Frank and Miller had vanished off the face of the earth, and the very system they served was covering it up. Frustrated and terrified, she logged into the family's computer. Frank wasn't tech-savvy, but their car had a basic commercial GPS tracker for insurance purposes, separate from the police system. She'd insisted on it after a fender bender last year. She logged into the service, her hands shaking. The map loaded, she traced his patrol route from the previous day. It was all routine until the last ping. 5:17 p.m., the car had been stationary for 34 minutes. The location popped up on the screen, a pin dropped on a quiet, tree-lined street, 114 Willow Creek Lane, Northwood. She Googled the address. A real estate listing from 3 years ago appeared, complete with photos of a stunning modern home with a large, luxurious swimming pool. The owner was listed as Dr. Elijah Vance. She did a quick search on the doctor, chief of emergency medicine at Northwood General. Glowing reviews, charity board member, a pillar of the community. What had Frank been doing at a prominent doctor's house for over half an hour? Why was this his last stop before he disappeared? The official story was a lie. The truth, or at least the beginning of it, was at that house. She had hit a wall with the police. Now she would go around it. She grabbed her car keys, a fierce, desperate resolve hardening her face. She would get answers. Elijah was in his study, trying to lose himself in medical journals. When the doorbell rang, his heart seized. He wasn't expecting anyone. Marcus's men were ghosts. They wouldn't come to the front door. He walked to the door, his bare feet cold on the hardwood floor. He glanced at the security camera feed on his phone. Standing on his porch was a woman in her late 40s, her face etched with worry and a sleepless determination that he recognized instantly. He saw it every day in the ER and the faces of family members waiting for news. But this was different. He knew, with a sudden gut-wrenching certainty, exactly who she was. He opened the door. The woman looked at him, her eyes scanning his face. "Dr. Vance?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly but firm. "Yes," he said, his own voice a hollow echo. "My name is Karen Donovan," she said, her gaze unwavering. "My husband is Officer Frank Donovan. I believe you saw him too. Days ago he's missing, and I think you know what happened to him."